This is a story about the role that the arts play in our lives. Moments of transformation in the relationship between art and society often come in hard times. Here in Britain, it was the Second World War.
Once more, onto the breach!
And in America, the Great Depression.
I am prepared to recommend the measures that a stricken nation in the midst of a stricken world may require.
When I was a kid, you always had an art teacher. Everybody had access to music, everybody had access to art.
Could this economic crisis see the next transformation?
Children who learn music actually do better in math. Kids whose imaginations are sparked by the arts are more engaged in school. These things aren't just extras, they are part of a well-rounded education.
It's certainly a time to take stock. Two stories and two men stand out. The first is John Maynard Keynes, the economic guru still hugely influential today, who was also the visionary founder of the Arts Council.
The artist walks where the breath of the spirit blows him. He cannot be told his direction, he doesn't know it himself.
The other unlikely impresario of the arts is President Franklin Roosevelt.
Tonight, Gordon Brown addresses the US Congress and appeals for a global New Deal.
At a recent meeting in Downing Street, all the talk was of Roosevelt's New Deal.
I've been blasting, I've been firing, and I've been pouring red-hot iron, and I've been having some hard traveling long.
What is it about it that was so remarkable and is still so resonant today? In a time of depression and distress, Roosevelt didn't ask what can we do for artists, but what can artists do for us? Arts buildings of impossibly curving steel and glass like this one have been shooting up all over Britain over the past decade. Banks have been hoarding pictures, art has been selling for millions. Indeed, art and money have become so close, too close for comfort, some might say, but art is almost become money. Then came the crash.
A day of turmoil, shares plummet after the collapse of one of America's biggest investment banks.
8,000,005.
That same day, the last gasp of another cash cow.
Damien Hirst is breaking new ground at an auction tonight.
In a period like this, what is art for? This is where it all blew up in our faces at the end of last year. The same thing happened 80 years ago. So our story starts here in America. Is this the end of an era or a new beginning?
There's the New York Stock Exchange over there, presiding over Wall Street, the place where, of course, the famous crash happened in 1929. But this doesn't look like the hub of American business at the moment. It looks more like a theme park. Of course, Americans don't like the D word, depression, but I see that they're not averse to making jokes about it in their ad campaigns.
CEOs are practically lining up here to get a bailout. But I'm not bailing out the fat cats on Wall Street. Sorry, Mr. Hedge Fund.
Thanks.
I'm bailing out you hardworking people on Main Street.
It's an idea straight from the Great Depression. Pizza, or indeed art, to feed not the fat cats, but the common man. We've been here before. In 1930s America, a quiet revolution took place in the arts. Roosevelt had bold plans for putting people to work, and the unprecedented idea of paying artists a salary, expecting socially useful work in return. He built bridges and dams and rebuilt the artistic landscape too.
The most important impact was the fact that artists felt the government was cared about them and valued what they did with their time. It was something to give people their dignity. That I always thought was far more important than the actual dollars.
When the stock market crashed this time, the art market went down with it. Bankers weren't just shaping the economy, but shaping art too. Their taste influencing what artists were making. Art was also a commodity. It gave a whole new meaning to art appreciation.
There was such an element of speculators involved in the art world where the art would move in a box from one side of a room, from one warehouse to another, and never end up on the wall or never being looked at even. You were buying names, you were buying things that were almost separate from the art itself. I think it's something obscene about that. Well, now the market has collapsed so profoundly, and in a certain perverse way, I think this is the best thing that's happened to the art world in 10 years.
A year in the life of Christie's, the fine art auctioneers. Things are going downhill.
How does Christie's and Sotheby's and Phillips, how do you all deal with the fact that the share prices are going down?
I think what we're trying to find at the moment is what is the bottom. Artists are obviously worried. I mean, they've seen their prices go up considerably. The last thing they need is a work not to sell at auction and to be very much a public downturn.
Public humiliation.
Maybe.
Down it goes. What's paralyzing the collecting market is the mentality of why buy today when you could buy 6 months from now cheaper.
You have to think about who was buying this art and why were they buying it. Many of the buyers were buying for status, for lifestyle. They're not there now. You know, someone who's losing billions in Russia is not thinking about buying art at the moment.
38 now, Mark Francis.
Good riddance to the lot of them, many would say. Art had made a pact with the devil and deserved to go down. But that's only part of the story. Bankers have also supported the arts in ways you wouldn't expect. For one thing, they gave a lot of money to the arts, encouraged by huge tax breaks, a kind of indirect state subsidy.
How reliant were you on the prosperity of all those bankers?
One of our top donors lost a lot of money with Bernard Madoff and that whole scandal. We have, banks themselves who are giving us money or giving less money. But aside from that, New York City's economy is, there's a huge amount of money in taxes that come from the bonuses that Wall Street bankers were getting. So we're having about a $500,000 cut just on the basis of decreased tax revenue to New York City. We've lost 15% of our staff so far. But the real impact is next year. There are other institutions around New York City and around America that are already beginning to close. The Metropolitan Opera has announced 15 or 20% budget reduction. That's an icon in New York City, the Met. I mean, it's distressing.
There are billionaires who have supported the Met in the past, or maybe not billionaires anymore, but the Met survived the Great Depression, which gives us hope that it can survive this great recession or depression as it obviously is becoming.
And then another man emerged with a vision as big as Roosevelt's, John D. Rockefeller Jr. He intended this to be the new home for the Metropolitan Opera. When the crash came, the opera pulled out, but Rockefeller was unstoppable.
The Rockefeller Center is one of the unlikely fruits of the Great Depression. The building was an act of faith, almost a folly. Despite the crash, the family started to build it in 1930. Philanthropy and business were joined at the hip. It was conceived as a giant arts center, as well as a palace for business.
Bad times brought forth big, bold ideas, grand ambitions for social cohesion. With Lincoln lending a hand, this mural is called American Progress. Diego Rivera, the Mexican artist, was originally commissioned to paint the mural.
But he insisted on inserting a portrait of Lenin. So they destroyed his work and asked a Spanish artist to do this mural instead.
Fear of socialism would plague the period. The New Deal wanted to mythologize the common man but stay capitalist. Yet Diego Rivera's style and politics would have a huge influence on all the mural artists of the era. All over America, especially in the South and Midwest, like here in Chicago, smaller art centers sprang up. These were funded not by a philanthropist, but by the government. The Depression as good as created modern state-subsidized art.
I was about 17, 18 years old, and a number of us young artists were armed with collection cans. And we stood on the corners collecting a mile of dimes to buy this building because we had to have a place to have the art center in. And Miss Eleanor Roosevelt came from Washington, D.C. to help cut the ribbon. And the streets were closed off and crowded with people because they came to see Miss Roosevelt. And I was one of the young people involved in that.
How did the WPA support the artists?
The WPA paid the salaries of our director and our staff, our art teachers and all. Artists who were on the WPA would make paintings in their home studios and all, and they would turn them into the WPA, and they would pay them a regular salary for making those paintings.
The WPA put 4.5 million people to work, of whom 45,000 were in the arts projects. Most had to be on the relief rolls to qualify for the money and to be able to prove that they'd worked as artists before. There were 103 of these community art centers. This one attracted many local black artists who became nationally famous later.
Henry Avery.
Henry Avery, yes, I remember him very well, and Archibald Motley and many of the others. They've all gone on to the other world, but their paintings are left here as their legacy.
And there were photographers also doing very good work here. Gordon Parks worked here, didn't he?
Right, that's right.
Photographers like Parks, Dorothea Lange, and Walker Evans documented the poverty of an America scarcely recorded before. Government money was poured into the arts, with artists going out to paint murals in public buildings. This one, painted by a New York artist, Harry Sternberg, is an epic history of Chicago. It commemorates the Great Fire of 1871, which consumed much of the downtown area, and celebrates the rise of the skyscraper.
Relief was the first mission, and secondly was the creation of art for the people. The art had to be accessible, and that's why it was largely representational. So you don't see much abstract art.
They were historical, they were epic.
Yes, and they also tended to celebrate certain themes: hard work, patriotism. The idea was maybe to celebrate ordinary workers as opposed to captains of industry, who are fairly absent from most of these murals.
They were the bankers of their time.
Yeah, they were really persona grata during the 1930s.